And after a little break, we're back again at chapter 18, verse 18 of 2 Samuel. Now Absalom in his lifetime had taken and reared up for himself a pillar which is in the king's dale, for he said, I have no son to keep my name in remembrance. And he called the pillar after his own name, and it is called unto this day Absalom's place. Notes. What was the difference in David's sin and Absalom's sin? Of course, all sin is heinous in the eyes of God and is actually directed against him, much like a slap to the face. Well, the difference is the following. David's sin was a sin of passion, with the murder of Uriah an effort to cover up the sin. Absalom's sin had as its foundation the sin of Satan himself in his rebellion against God. In other words, Absalom entered into Satan's rebellion. It was a far more heinous sin than King David's sin. However, most of the church world does not see it that way, but actually would join Absalom because outwardly it looks so good and so right and so wonderful, but it's false. David's sin was not joined by anyone else, whereas Absalom's sin was joined by the majority of Israel. In other words, they became associated with him, which in fact threatened the very foundation of Israel's existence. David repented immediately when his sin was found out because he was a man of God. And there is no record that Absalom ever really knew God, and therefore there was no repentance. Now, that's just really my opinion on the subject. There's no record of his repentance. Verse 19. Then said Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, Let me now run and bear the king tidings how that the Lord has avenged him of his enemies. And Joab said unto him, You shall not bear tidings this day, but you shall bear tidings another day. But this day you shall bear no tidings, because the king's son is dead. Notes. In other words, the king will not receive your message quite like you think it's going to, or he's going to. Verse 21. Then said Joab to Cushi, Go tell the king what you have seen. And Cushi bowed himself unto Joab and ran. Notes. Joab was unwilling to expose Ahimaaz to the king's displeasure, and we gather from verse 27 that the sending of a person of low rank, which Cushi was, would be understood to signify evil tidings. Verse 22. Then said Ahimaaz the son of Zadok yet again to Joab, But however, let me, I pray, you also run after Cushi. And Joab said, Wherefore will you run, my son, seeing that you have no tidings ready? Notes. Now, this is another translational error that you can find if you look at the Hebrew and translate it to English. It should read, Seeing that you have no message that will find for you the king's favor and reward. Verse 23. But howsoever said he, Let me run, and he said unto him, Run. Then Ahimaaz ran by the way of the plain and overran Cushi. Notes. Ahimaaz would not be denied, so Joab allowed him to go. Verse 24. And David sat between the two gates, and the watchman went up to the roof over the gate unto the wall, and lifted up his eyes, and looked, and behold, a man running alone. And the watchman cried and told the king, and the king said, If he be alone, there is tidings in his mouth. And he came apace and drew near. Notes. If David's army had been defeated, then there would be many stragglers hurrying back. But since there was only one man coming, and then a second one a short time later, well, this was kind of signaling good tidings. Verse 26. And the watchman saw another man running, and the watchman called unto the porter, and said, Behold, another man running alone. And the king said, He also brings tidings. Notes. Well, this second one obviously was Cushi. Verse 27. And the watchman said, Methink the running of the foremost is like the running of Ahimaaz the son of Zadok. And the king said, He is a good man, and comes with good tidings. And Ahimaaz called, and said unto the king, All is well. And he fell down to the earth upon his face before the king, and said, Blessed be the Lord your God, which has delivered up the men who lifted up their hand against my lord the king. And the king said, Is the young man Absalom safe? And Ahimaaz answered, When Joab sent the king's servant, and me your servant, I saw a great tumult, but I knew not what it was. Notes. Ahimaaz did not know what happened to Absalom, but seeing the king's face, now knew why Joab was reluctant for him to come bearing this particular message. You can only imagine why he is evasive in his answer. Verse 30. And the king said unto him, Turn aside and stand here. And he turned aside and did so. And behold, Cushi came, and Cushi said, Tidings, my lord the king, for the Lord has avenged you this day of all them who rose up against you. And the king said unto Cushi, Is the young man Absalom safe? And Cushi answered, The enemies of my lord the king, and all who rise against you to do you hurt, be as that young man is. And the king was much moved, and went up to the chamber over the gate, and wept. And as he went, thus he said, O my son Absalom, my son Absalom, would God I had died for you, O Absalom, my son, my son. Notes. You can only imagine how David's bitter grief was, but no doubt it was deepened by the consciousness that his own sin had perhaps contributed in some way toward Absalom's rebellion and death. As well, the pain and the hurt were deepened by the realization that there was no hope in such a death. He had a very, very bad gut feeling that Absalom died lost, much like I have. Chapter 19. And it was told Joab, Behold, the king weeps and mourns for Absalom. And the victory that day was turned into mourning unto all the people, for the people heard say that day how the king was grieved for his son. Notes. The mourning was justified, but not for Absalom. Israel was in a terrible state, considering that the majority of the nation had joined in the rebellion with him, thereby rebelling against David, who was God's anointed. As well, verse 9 says, And all the people were at strife throughout all the tribes of Israel. Nasty effect of rebellion. Verse 3. And the people got them by stealth that day into the city, as people being ashamed steal away when they flee in battle. Notes. Well, the soldiers returned from victory, but yet they were met with what seemed like complete and total defeat. It must have been quite perplexing to them to have seen that. Verse 4. But the king covered his face, and the king cried with a loud voice, O my son Absalom! O Absalom, my son, my son. Notes. I'm going to go ahead and just say it flatly. Absalom died lost, and this was the reason for David's great grief, and of course he blamed himself, and, well, you can certainly sympathize with that if you think about it. Continuing. And Joab came into the house to the king, and said, You have shamed this day the faces of all your servants, which this day have saved your life, and the lives of your sons and of your daughters, and the lives of your wives, and the lives of your concubines, in that you love your enemies and hate your friends, for you have declared this day that you regard neither princes nor servants. For this day I perceive that if Absalom had lived, and all we had died this day, then it had pleased you well. Notes. Amid the incessant movement of this chapter, it is not once mentioned that David inquired of the Lord. The result was that he allowed his selfish and excessive affection for his rebellious little spoiled brat son to smother the affection which he should have shown for his brave and faithful soldiers. Verse 7. Now therefore arise, go forth, and speak comfortably unto your servants. For I swear by the Lord, if you go not forth, there will not tarry one with you this night. And that will be worse unto you than all the evil that befell you from your mouth, or from your youth until now. And we must pick up in chapter 19, verse 8 of the book of 2 Samuel. Thank you, and God bless.